Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality, coming back with you today with an article from Tablet Magazine. When is this dated? March 6th. And the title of the article is How the Gaza Ministry of Health Fakes Casualty Numbers, says the evidence is in their own poorly fabricated figures. And you see this a lot with the Israel, Gaza, Hamas, Palestine, whatever you want to call it, situation going on over there, that there's apparently, like you keep saying, 20 or 30,000 people are dead, and in Gaza, and oh my God, and it turns out that like you're listening to the terrorist organization who apparently knows at the drop of a hat how many people were died in a bombing, but can't tell you how many of the Israeli and American hostages are still alive. There's like a couple hundred of them, but they, as soon as a bomb hits, they're like, oh, 500 people are dead. They're all children, and they were all scholars and doctors and everything. So let's go ahead and go through this and see exactly what they do. I've seen some posts on X that have commented on this article and said this is actually very informative, and I have not read it yet, but I was interested to see exactly where this is going to go. So let's see how the Gaza Health Ministry fakes their casualty numbers. So the number of civilian casualties in Gaza has been at the center of international attention since the start of the war. The main source for the data has been the Hamas-controlled Gaza Health Ministry, which now claims more than 30,000 dead, the majority of which it says are children and women. Recently, the Biden administration lent legitimacy to Hamas's figure. When asked at a House Armed Services Committee hearing last week how many Palestinian women and children have been killed since October 7th, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said the number was over 25,000. The Pentagon quickly clarified that the secretary was citing an estimate from the Hamas-controlled Health Ministry. I'm glad that they did that. I wouldn't have expected the Pentagon to actually clarify that, but thank you for doing that. It says, President Biden himself had earlier cited this figure, asserting that too many of the over 27,000 Palestinians killed in this conflict have been innocent civilians and children, including thousands of children. The White House also explained that the president was referring to publicly available data about the total number of casualties, and of course Biden got it wrong, because what has he been right about for about basically anything for, decades? It says, here's the problem with this data. The numbers are not real. That much is obvious to anyone who understands how naturally occurring numbers work. The casualties are not overwhelmingly women and children, and the majority may be Hamas fighters. It says if Hamas's numbers are faked or fraudulent in some way, there may be evidence in the numbers themselves that can demonstrate it. While there is not much data available, there is a little, and it is enough. From October 26th until November 10th, 2023, the Gaza Health Ministry released daily casualty figures that include both a total number and a specific number of women and children. The first place to look is the reported total number of deaths. The graph of total deaths by date is increasing with almost metronomical linearity, as the graph in Figure 1 reveals. So the total state, whoa, look at that. It's like a diagonal line straight up without any sort of curves or anything. How about that? Says the caption for the graph, which I don't normally go, but I think it's worth reading here, says the graph reveals an extremely regular increase in casualties over the period. Data aggregated by the author and provided by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs, or OCHA, based on Gaza Ministry of Health figures. Yeah, I would say that if people are dying, it's not going to be in exactly this line here. That should be enough to make people go, oh, maybe they are full of shit. Let's keep going. It says this regularity is almost surely not real. One would expect quite a bit of variation day to day. In fact, the daily reported casualty count over this period averages 270 plus or minus about 15%. This is strikingly little variation. There should be days with twice the average or more, and others with half or less. Perhaps what is happening is the Gaza Ministry is releasing fake daily numbers that vary too little because they do not have a clear understanding of the behavior of naturally occurring numbers. Unfortunately, verified control data is not available to formally test this conclusion, but the details of the daily counts render the numbers suspicious, and I would fully agree with that, especially if you're just going here and looking at just a straight line going up, sort of thing. So similarly, we should see variation in the number of child casualties that tracks the variation in the number of women. This is because the daily variation in death counts is caused by the variation in the number of strikes on residential buildings and tunnels, which should result in considerable variability in the totals but less variation in the percentage of deaths across groups. This is a basic statistical fact about chance variability. Consequently, on the days with many women casualties, there should be large numbers of children casualties, and on the days when just a few women are reported to have been killed, just a few children should be reported. This relationship can be measured and quantified by the R-square or R2 statistic that measures how correlated the daily casualty count for women is with the daily casualty count for children. If the numbers were real, we would expect R2 to be substantively larger than 0, trending closer to 1.0. But R2 is 0.017, which is statistically and substantively not different from 0. Okay, we're getting into statistical talk here, which is, my brain's already kind of freezing over here, but I understand what that means, like this end part here. Okay, so here's the line just kind of, it's the same sort of line as the previous graph, instead of it being pretty varied. And the caption says, the daily number of children reported to have been killed is totally unrelated to the number of women reported. The R2, as we said, was 0.017, and the relationship is statistically and substantively insignificant. It says, this lack of correlation is the second circumstantial piece of evidence suggesting the numbers are not real, but there is more. The daily number of women casualties should be highly correlated with the number of non-women and non-children, such as men, reported. Again, this is expected because of the nature of battle. The ebbs and flows of the bombings and attacks by Israel should cause the daily count to move together. But that is not what the data shows. Not only is there not a positive correlation, there is a strong negative correlation, which makes no sense at all and establishes the third piece of evidence that the numbers are not real. And we're doing the charts now. It's just a backwards diagonal line straight down. It says the correlation between the daily men and daily women death count is absurdly strong and negative. So back to the article itself. It says, consider some further anomalies in the data. First, the death count reported on October 29th contradicts the numbers reported on the 28th, insofar as they imply that 26 men came back to life. Wow. I mean, that is the area, at least in the general vicinity of where, Jesus was. So maybe they caught his powers. How about that? Or they're lying. It says this can happen because of a misattribution or just reporting error. There are a few other days when the numbers of men are reported to be near 0. If these were just reporting errors, then on those days where the death count for men appears to be an error, the women's count should be typical, at least on average. But it turns out that on the 3 days when the men's count is near 0, suggesting an error, the women's count is high. In fact, the 3 highest daily women casualty counts occurs on those 3 days. Okay, and here's a chart, and I'll read the caption again. It says there are 3 days where the male casualty count is close to 0. These 3 days correspond to the 3 highest daily women's casualty counts. Okay, so taken together, what does all this imply? Yes, that's what I'm wondering, because my eyes are glazing over again. It says, while the evidence is not dispositive, it is highly suggestive that a process unconnected or loosely connected to reality was used to report the numbers. Most likely, the Hamas ministry settled on a daily total arbitrarily. That's kind of what I was thinking already. We know this because the daily totals increased too consistently to be real, right, as pointed out in the very first chart. So then they assigned about 70% of the total to be women and children, splitting that amount randomly from day to day. Not cutting that out. So then they filled in the number of men as set by the predetermined total. This explains all the data observed. So, whoops, caught you guys in a lie. Says there are other obvious red flags. Says the Gaza Health Ministry has consistently claimed that about 70% of the casualties are women or children. This total is far higher than the number reported in earlier conflicts with Israel. Another red flag, raised by Salo Eisenberg and written about extensively, is that if 70% of the casualties are women and children and 25% of the population is adult male, then either Israel is not successfully eliminating Hamas fighters or adult male casualty counts are extremely low. This by itself strongly suggests that the numbers are at a minimum grossly inaccurate. Let me repeat that sentence. I read that wrong. It says this by itself strongly suggests that the numbers are at a minimum grossly inaccurate and quite probably outright faked. Finally, on February 15th, Hamas admitted to losing 6,000 of its fighters, which represents more than 20% of the total number of casualties reported. Taken together, Hamas is reporting not only that 70% of casualties are women and children, but also that 20% are fighters. This is not possible unless Israel is somehow not killing non-combatant men, or else Hamas is claiming that almost all the men in Gaza are Hamas fighters, which is probably fairly likely. Are there better numbers? Some objective commentators have acknowledged Hamas's numbers in previous battles with Israel to be roughly accurate. Nevertheless, this war is wholly unlike its predecessors in scale or scope. International observers who were able to monitor previous wars are now completely absent, so the past can't be assumed to be a reliable guide. The fog of war is especially thick in Gaza, making it impossible to quickly determine civilian death totals with any accuracy. Not only do official Palestinian death counts fail to differentiate soldiers from children, which is a big deal, it says, but Hamas also blames all deaths on Israel, even if caused by Hamas's own misfired rockets, accidental explosions, deliberate killings, or internal battles, which we've seen over the years, including just since October 7th, quite a few times already. So one group of researchers at the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health compared Hamas reports to data on UNRWA workers, who is a UN group that works pretty much hand in hand with Hamas. Not good people. Says they argue that because the death rates were approximately similar, Hamas's numbers must not be inflated. But their argument relied on a crucial and unverified assumption that UNRWA workers were not disproportionately more likely to be killed than the general population. That premise exploded when it was uncovered that a sizable fraction of UNRWA workers were affiliated with Hamas. Some were even exposed as having participated in the October 7th massacre itself. Says the truth can't yet be known and probably never will be. The total civilian casualty count is likely to be extremely overstated. Israel estimates that at least 12,000 fighters have been killed. And if that number proves to be even reasonably accurate, then the ratio of non-combatant casualties to combatants is remarkably low, at almost 1.4 to 1 and perhaps as low as 1 to 1. By historical standards of urban warfare, where combatants are embedded above and below into civilian population centers, this is a remarkable and successful effort to prevent unnecessary loss of life while fighting an implacable enemy that protects itself with civilians. Yeah, and I mean, this is the most careful army in the world, too, so they go out of their way to make sure that they're not killing civilians, so why would they just suddenly start now? Okay, so it says, right down here it says, data used in the article can be found here at this hyperlink. If you're a statistical, person, I'd go ahead and check on that or click on that. But what do you guys think about this? I mean, I've never thought their numbers were right because, again, I don't believe a terrorist organization. That's just not something I would do. But what do you think about this? Let me know in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll talk to you soon.